This is the Victor Davis Hanson podcast. We're recording today, Tuesday, January 12th in the year 2021. Quite a different week from last week when we were recording on Wednesday. In the midst of things happening in Washington, that will be the main subjects of today's discussions. I'm Jack Fowler, the co-host. Victor Davis Hanson is the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, eminent historian, and syndicated columnist and writer. And the show is produced by our great friend, Sarah Schutte. So, Victor, there's so much to get into today. We have a great analysis of the narrative post riot, we'll call it a narrative, by our friend Heather Higgins, who I assume is a friend. When I say our, I assume she's a friend of yours also. Another Heather McDonald at City Journal has written a piece I think worthy of some consideration. So is Selena Zito, who's really covered the populist conservative movement very well the last few years, has some harsh criticisms of what transpired last week, worthy of your attention. And we have a few questions from some of our listeners. And of course, we have your most recent piece from American Greatness about 2021 being far crazier so far than 2020, and equating it with Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. So if it's okay with you, Victor, I'd like to start off with some emails I got from some of our listeners. And it's pretty, one of them here is pretty charged. I think it encompasses a number of feelings for a number of Trump voters, and not necessarily all Trump voters or Trump fans, or, there may be, I'm a Trump voter who is really an anti-Biden voter, but his name is Paul. And here's what Paul wrote. And this was last week on Thursday, the day after the riots at the Capitol. He wrote, "Yesterday's tragedy, combined with the losses in Georgia, need to be addressed. Trump clearly incited the confrontation and has consciously sowed disorder within the Republican ranks. He has undermined whatever good he may have accomplished over the past 4 years." Now, by the way, Paul is a Trump voter. And he's saying he's packing a lot in there, which you may or may not agree with in whole or part. How does Professor Hanson reconcile the good about Trump that he often discusses on the podcast with the clear horrors that Trump helped manifest over the past week? It seems that in supporting Trump, we made a pact with the devil and lost. We knew he was unprincipled and of bad or unprincipled character, yet consoled ourselves by saying the trade-offs were worth it. Maybe they still are, but I have my doubts. Now, I don't know how many people Paul speaks for. Paul speaks for Paul. I have a feeling much of what he says others can agree with in whole or part. But Victor, I think that's a reasonable summation of a lot of people's observations of last week. What do you make of that? And how do you respond to the main question of reconciling things?
Well, I'm going through today, as I speak, about 30 emails I got for an article that came out Monday that I wrote for American Greatness, which we can discuss if you want, which
we're going to, right?
I pointed out that Donald Trump would have been much wiser had he ceased, and I said this, I think, on Laura Ingraham on November 6th, and I said it again in November. I said it in November 22nd. I wrote something for National Review, and I got some calls from the White House that were angry about it. So what did I write? I said that this election was essentially lost in March and April, when the state legislature's voting patterns or laws, which has alone, except if overridden by Congress, has the domain of establishing procedures in each state. Okay. And so due to COVID and due to the left-wing agenda, the deadlines were massaged. The needs for addresses were massaged. The need for authenticity of signatures were massaged. And the result was you got 100 million people voting either early or through mail-in ballots, and the rejection rate went from 4% down to less than a half. So if you do the math, You got 3 or 4 million votes that by any other standard you would not have allowed in. That was, I think, the difference of the 43,000 votes. So you can object to that. And what was your redress? It was 3 things. It was to go into court and sue at these local, state levels, and sue in the federal courts. That failed. And that had failed before the election, but it failed right after the election. Or you could demand recounts. I didn't quite see the recounts in Georgia or Arizona, because the problem wasn't the people that had the ballot and a name. It was the people who got a ballot. In other words, the problem was that there wasn't verification of the person who voted, not that when they actually voted, you wouldn't find one ballot per, one name, just that the name might not be authentic. So that didn't work. And then I suggested you could get data analyst, or you could look at computers and find the Kraken, as Sidney Powell, and that didn't work. But that was very early on. So I suggested that Donald Trump should make that effort to show people that he wasn't abandoning them. There were legitimate concern, but that this, I think I talked to some people from the White House, and I wrote on November 22nd again, and then I wrote again the other day. I said, why did he not go down to Georgia, save those 2 seats, tell the key swing voters, you may not like me, but my God, it's between socialism and you, and all that's in the way of socialism is Purdue and Loeffler not just for the Senate, but for the entire Congress, not just for the entire Congress, but for the entire government. And if you don't vote to stop these 2, you're going to get, Puerto Rico as a state, or you're going to get okay. And then after that, I said, why don't you go and barnstorm the country and say you're a righteously grieved Andrew Jackson? Don't mention yourself. Don't say, I got cheated. Just say, you know what? The system is wrong to have 60% of the country doubting the election, but we have to change the voting to make it transparent and authenticated.
Excuse me, you're suggesting that that a former President Trump in this scenario,
yes,
Pete Barnes.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely. Right. So then he drops all of that stuff in early November. There would have been no rally. There would have been no attack on Pence, none of that stuff. And he saves the Senate, and he's credited with that. Now he's the titular head of the party. He roars back. People are going to get angry. They're going to vote in the midterms. He increases the Senate margin. He takes back the House. And where would he be today if that had happened? Where would he be if he just started to do that? He'd be in a very different position. So that's one thing. So yes, I agree with your listener, but I had said that.
Right.
And most of I don't want to say most, all of the correspondence I got then and now is angry that I betrayed the MAGA cause by even suggesting that.
Oh, Victor, just to make credit, I don't think the guy here was, by the way, implying anything about you personally. It was just a general.
I know that.
Okay.
I know that. So then the question more specifically. So that's what could have happened. Secondly, we have to distinguish Donald Trump from other candidates. So if Kamala Harris says all summer long why people are burning, not going in the Capitol where tragically 5 people died at the heart of our Congress or heart of our republic, when all those people should be swiftly prosecuted, they're being identified, their names are being released, great. I'm all for that. Let's punish them, this splinter group. But by the same token, we had over $3 or $4 billion worth of damage. We had 700 law enforcement officers injured. We had 33 killed. And we've had the downtowns occupied. Raz Simone for 3 weeks took over Seattle. So during this whole period when we needed calm, what did the president-elect say? He said, Antifa is just an organization. I mean, he didn't say it was an organization. He said it was an idea. It's not an organization. What if Donald Trump had said, you know what, that stuff that happened in the Capitol, that wasn't really people, it was just an idea. And what did Kamala Harris say? She said, almost literally now, she said, this is going to keep going. And it's not going to stop on election. And it should not stop on election. Then she organized efforts to bail people out. Not bail people out for unlawful assembly, bail people out for convicted violence. What if Donald Trump right now said, you know what, let's have a bail program to bail these guys out?
Right.
So there's an asymmetry there. that nobody says. And I'm not saying that's 50-50, but I'm suggesting that Donald Trump is a reaction to that asymmetry.
Right.
And then somebody would say, yes, Victor, but we've never seen language like that. Yeah, we have seen language. Ronald Reagan, that everybody quotes now. A lot of my former colleagues say, we got to get back to Reaganism. Reagan was my governor. I remember when the campuses were on fire. I remember when they were spraying tear gas from helicopters at UC Berkeley. And I remember Ronald Reagan as governor said, if we're going to have a bloodbath, let's get it over with. I remember Ronald Reagan, he was barnstorming the state. He wanted to take the nomination away from Jerry Ford. People said he was a wrecker. He was a disuniter. And what did he say right in the middle of all this to show everybody that he was a uniter? When the Hearst were forced to hand out food to poor people under the aegis of the Black Panthers, he said, I hope they has botulism. Think of that. Okay. Does anybody ever say anything? Do I have all these Reaganites that say, oh my God, that cancels out his whole life? No.
Right.
Barack Obama went to Philadelphia and he said, I'm a Chicago guy, and you take a gun to a knife fight. You said, get in their faces. So I understand that the frequency of the Trump rhetoric is greater than that. And I understand sometimes the vehemence could be greater, but we're still talking about an asymmetry in coverage. There was something about Trump that made him scrutinized to a degree we've never seen before. The second thing is, and I would use, I think all of us in our youth saw the K Mutiny. Some of us maybe read the Herman Wouk novel.
Right.
I met him a couple of times in his 90s, and I asked him once. It's central. Everybody thinks Captain Queeg was a nut with the little balls and the paranoia in his hands. He would, and Humphrey Bogart character, but that wasn't the point of the novel, and that wasn't the point of the movie. Remember that great scene at the end when his lawyer, everybody's cheering, they destroyed Captain Queeg, and he turns to Fred McMurray, I think the actor is, and says, you should be ashamed of yourself. And
he throws champagne in his face.
And same thing with Van Johnson. He says, all it took was a little bit of cooperation, but you had to prove your big point. And what I'm getting is, when he was elected, why did Madonna have to say the first day she wants to blow up the White House? Why did Rosa Brooks, distinguished lawyer, establishmentarian, have to write an article 10 days later saying that he should either be impeached or he should be declared crazy and removed from the 25, or the military should have a coup and remove him? Why did 58 House representatives vote immediately to impeach him? Why did we have to go through the Logan Act, the Emoluments Clause? Why did we have to do all that? We didn't give him any benefit of the doubt. So what we did was we accentuated all this. I'm not suggesting that Trump wasn't prone to volatility. His career had shown that, but we're in new territory. And then finally, a third consideration. Okay, the questioner wants to know how you adjudicate that or how you rationalize it. And I look at Trump the way I do everybody else. Lincoln did more for the healing of the racial differences than any president, basically, in the history of the United States. He freed the slaves. He waged a war. He only had 40% support in the 1860 election. He took that 40%, and somehow he galvanized the nation, and he went to war. And 660,000 Americans died. And he's the great liberator. Did he say things that by modern standards were very racist? Yeah, he did. And did he do it because he was a politician or because that was the prevailing ignorance at the time? I don't know, but he did. And that's why right now, as we speak, they're canceling out a school in San Francisco. FDR, I didn't approve of. I don't approve of a lot of stuff in the New Deal, but I got criticism from the right when I finished the Second World Wars, and I said he was a marvelous wartime leader. He was. He saw the threat very early on in 1939. He let Carl Vinson go ahead and rebuild the U.S. fleet. He got us rearmed in a way that the Republican isolationist right did not. And so am I going to cancel him out because Anna Roosevelt said, hey, Dad, I know you're having an affair with Lucy Mercer and Mom is off somewhere with somebody else, and I'm going to help you facilitate that. And she did. And he died in the arms, basically, of his mistress. And he was, what if Donald Trump was found out that all this time having an affair and Melania didn't know it or did, and Ivanka was facilitating that? Does that count? Does that say that, wow, Roosevelt was wrong? That, hey, you guys, that Pearl Harbor speech, you don't realize he'd seen Lucy Mercer the day before. Is that what we want to do? And so I'm not trying to compartmentalize people's lives, but you look at the whole totality. And when I look at 3.5 unemployment and I look at 5.1 minority unemployment, a record, and I look at 2.5 GDP, and I look at fracking and cheap gas, I got my propane bill today, and I'm paying exactly half of what I did 8 or 9 years ago. And when I look at all that, and I see people from 2017 to 19 that never had any dignity and begged employers for a job, and suddenly the employers, as I said earlier, were coming up to them in Selma and saying, hey, I know you're on that roof. I know you're getting $17 an hour, but if you jump off that roof and get my pickup, I'll pay you 22 because I have a big development going in.
Right.
Well, that's a very different world than arguing over whether the minimum wage should be $12 or not. So he did a good thing, and it affected a lot of people's lives. And so you don't cancel that out. And it wasn't a lot of people, when I made that argument, people say, well, Mussolini made the trains run on time, and Hitler was popular because he didn't suffer the depression. The Germans didn't suffer that. No, I'm not saying that, because Donald Trump had not done any of that. The worst thing Donald Trump was accused of was putting people in cages. And we found out in the height of that controversy, we, the American people, most of us knew it, that Barack Obama built those cages. And they built the cages because the parents were deliberately bringing children across and felt that they would not be indicted, prosecuted for illegal entry or residency or background checks if they had children. So they decided to, have the parents face the legal consequences. Then what do you do with the children? But I can tell you, as somebody that's at ground zero, there were a lot of people who came in the last 20 years and they brought small children for that very reason. I don't think any of all these people who are so angry at Trump have ever had a knock on the door at 2 a.m. by someone who does not speak English from Oaxaca and hands you a piece of paper written with your doctor's name, coincidence, and address, and wants to know how to get there because she's 8 months pregnant and she's just arrived from Oaxaca, Mexico, 2,500 miles to the south. In other words, people in villages in Oaxaca knew that a good place to come was Fresno County and Selma, and they had a name of a doctor who was a very good OBGYN, and they would wait until they were 8 months pregnant and come across the border to get free health care, free delivery, and anchor, if I could use that taboo word, anchor baby citizenship. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of things that that we need to think about, all of these conflicting nuances, rather than just, well, put all the good on this side and all the bad on that side, and then tell us whether it's 51% or not. It doesn't work that way.
Victor, the other thing is we due to our unfriendly media, we seem to think we live in the age of Trump, where we really live in the age of growing and savage leftism, and because of that, hence Trump, hence his election, I think in 2016. And you've written about this before. You've compared the necessity, well, I'll call it necessity, of a Trump-like presidency. You've equated it with some of the movies of John Wayne's character in The Searchers and Shane. You've also called Trump presidency a kind of a political chemotherapy, given the cancer of leftism, which we see in its savagery this week. Which begs another question that another listener writes about: Are we seeing the American Republic fall like the Roman Republic? But I just see leftism truly on the march and empowered in the last week. To me, that is the greater issue. And not you would say, I've had said and have written, not to take away anything, criticisms of what happened last week, but that does not exonerate the greater threat to our republic and our rights.
Well, I mean, here we are, and Joe Biden has not even assumed office. And what has he weighed in on? Let's take the matter of race. He's basically accused the Capitol Police themselves, or the people who control the Capitol Police, who are largely a large percentage are African American, of being racist. And he made an outright false statement that had they been black, as did Michelle Obama, they would have been treated differently. When we know that, as I said earlier, Roz Simone, an African American, and African American guards with AR-15s took over all of, so I shouldn't say all, but a large swath of Seattle, 6 blocks, and occupied the area around a police precinct and was never arrested. And 4 people were shot and 2 people were killed. So that was ridiculous. And that was just insightful. And then the next thing he did was he said he was going to dole out COVID relief to small businesses based on race. So if you're, part of the Oklahoma diaspora and you live over here in Tulare and you have a tire shop and you have no money and you couldn't change people's tires and you apply, then you're going to wait in line because you're the wrong skin color, and somebody who is economically more advantaged than you are but is not white. So that's the second thing he did.
Right.
And then Tucker had an expose, and others have picked it up, about Miss Clark, his nominee for one of the most important positions in the government, and the DOJ is the Office of Civil Rights.
Right.
The lead prosecuting attorney. It turns out, quite a long time ago, but when she was a student, she was writing things that I don't like the word Hitlerian, but that's what they were. They were talking about a pseudoscientific, in-depth, in detail explanation of why people that were black had superior brain capacity than people that were white. And that explains why white people were so toxic. And then if you think that she didn't reify that with deeds, then she brought one of the most notorious anti-Semites from Wellesley College in to speak and praised him. And I don't think she's ever renounced that. And so that's the 3 things that Joe Biden has done to unite us on the matter of race. Right. And on the matter of, let's bring red and blue state America, he's called Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz Nazis, and that was funny. He said that in the manner of Joseph Goebbels' line about Dresden, he said, and that was funny because he said 250 people he claimed were killed. Well, maybe it was 2,500 people he killed. No, he said 25,000 were killed. Well, actually, there were 25,000 killed. And then he said, so trying to impress us with his knowledge of the past, he didn't know anything about it other than he knew that he wanted to find some way to call his opponents Nazis. And this is all under the aegis of uniting. And so I think we're in for, Rush Limbaugh said something that was very profound. He said that he had failed to explain to people that the dangers of the left, because this isn't the Democratic Party. This is not even the Progressive Party. This is the hard left party. And the hard left party does not want to unite people. They feel they're toxic, they're right wing, they're racist, they're sexist, they're homophobic, as Hillary told us, and they want to destroy them. And it's about process now. It's not about policy. It's about taking over the Congress and changing the rules so that conservatives, whether it's Electoral College, the Supreme Court, 4 more senators through 2 new states, the filibuster, so that they don't have power again.
Yeah, let me just then shift over here, Victor, to your new piece in American Greatness, and just get to the very end of it where you just touched on this. You talk about how, as we all experienced it, how crazy 2020 was and how wild 2021 already is. And here's how you conclude this wonderful essay. So February through April could be an iffy period. Biden likely will allow his own hatred of Trump to lead to a renunciation of what have been largely successful policies overseas. I wish you'd talk about that in a sec. Given Trump's last 2 weeks, the left will seek process, not just policy, changes in a manner not seen since 1932 or 1964. It wants to cleanse those with whom it disagrees and destroy rather than defeat them. It is quickly consolidating the means of public communication and corporate culture made easier by a COVID-stricken, quarantined, and financially strapped population. For now, there is nothing to stop them. So hang on. It's going to be Mr. Toad's wild, scary ride for all of 2021. And just as a strange, not analogy, but maybe example, I would we be surprised if where I work, where National Review somehow crossed the line, and crossing a line today means doing something insufficient or not speaking up when you should have spoken up, and having banks now run by their lefty business school management make some policy that they're not going to engage in any transaction with this publication because it didn't do this or that, and actually kill jobs and on a corporate level, and then go after people who contributed to Donald Trump's campaign and deny them through LinkedIn or any other. I mean, there's a real broadening effort, which I think gets to the questioner before, not the first one, but the one about failing the Roman Republic, of seeing our true rights, not only First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, but that great unalienable right of the pursuit of happiness destroyed by the left. That is the game plan here.
Well, they've created a mixture of the Salem witch trials and the McCarthy period. So what you're saying to me and what I'm saying, one false word and you can be fired. Not one false word, any word that can be interpreted that it's racist, sexist, homophobic, transgender phobic, whatever it is. That's the climate. It's like the first 2 weeks of the Me Too, or third week into the Salem witch trial, or at the height of McCarthy's power, or Soviet show trials. And in the case of big tech, the power is everywhere. I'll give you two examples. I had a conversation with somebody that a colleague, I won't mention anywhere he worked, but I'll just say a colleague. And I started mentioning Silicon Valley. This was before all this happened. And he started to frown and he just got up and walked away. And I mentioned that to someone. I said, this guy is he goes, Victor, he is a multi-millionaire now. He's on a board. This is the name of the company. They offered stock options. He's rich beyond Croesus. Why would you be so stupid enough to suggest there's an octopus out there called Silicon Valley?
Right.
And then I talked to another person who was a technician for a major cable news. I won't mention the name. And he said to me, we're okay, you're going to have 3.5 minutes. Are you going to do your standard 15 seconds? Everybody has the standard 15 seconds. We need to know how much time. Well, the standard 15 seconds is something like this. Before I start, I want to reiterate that I condemn wholeheartedly the splinter group that broke off from Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, so you have to say that, even though you've said it 100 times.
Right.
So that's kind of a ritual, like kind of a religious chant that you have to say. And so that's where we are now. And it's so if we talk about Silicon Valley, Michelle Obama says, I think Donald Trump should be deplatformed, rah. And 24 hours, Apple, Google, and Amazon deplatformed it. Together, that's $4 trillion, three of the largest market capitalized companies in the world do that. And then if you say, well, that's what Rockefeller did with the oil companies, that's what they did with the railroads, that's what they did with the steel companies. But you remember what they said, if you don't like the monopolies, then ride a horse. You don't want to pay for gas, ride a horse. So these companies don't even do that. I mean, they say, if you don't want to use social media, do what? Email, Gmail. They're going after people on Gmail.
Right.
If you don't want, go use Parler, they're going after Parler to destroy it. So I guess what they're saying is, write a letter and mail it to somebody, or I don't know if they have control yet of all the phones, but it's a false, this libertarian conservative argument. Well, private company can do what he wants to regulate free speech. No, it's not talking about free speech. We're talking about a private company that uses the public airspace that belongs to all of us to transmit and use its medium, that people's lives, their medical data, their way of communicating with their doctor, all of that depends on free and open exchange.
Right.
And these particular 30-something people are saying to them, if you went to a rally, a peaceful rally, and you said something, or if you said something, don't steal the election or something, we're going to get you off of that. And by getting you off it, we're going to deprive you of all that. And you have to do something else.
Right.
I just don't think they can do it any more than out here Pacific Gas and Electric can tell me, well, we don't like what you did, so we're cutting off your power. Just go get your own, generator, because it's a public utility. They are public utilities, and that's the big question. And they're very brilliant on what they've done. Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin and all these guys, and Jobs family, they all went to the right wing and they said, we are your JP Morgans, we are your Rockefellers, we are your Carnegies, we are Edison, we're the inventors, the entrepreneurs,
Right.
we're the laissez-faire, we're creating so much wealth for the United States because of this free enterprise system, don't even touch us. And they said, yep, you are. We're not going to touch you. And then they turned right around and they went to the Elizabeth Warrens and the Bernie Sanders and said, you know what, we know you're jealous of corporate America, but all of this money, 200 million is going to Joe Biden. None's going to Trump. 500 million is going to be put into key precincts where we enhance the voter turnout by beefing up public officials and bureaucrats, by helping them with our employees to get out the vote. And so therefore, you may not like what we're doing, but all of the rewards go to you. So they play that little two steps and they get away with it. And now I think they've gone too far. I think people are really, really angry because they did something impossible, Jack. Today is what, Tuesday?
Tuesday, the 12th of January.
And we're what, 6 days away from the notorious Wednesday when
Yes.
Donald Trump told everybody, peacefully and patriotic, go to the Congress. And some did. And then that was the end of Donald Trump, supposedly. And guess what? We're not talking about that today, not to the same extent. People are frightened about big tech. So it was a night of the long knives, if you could use that imagery. I don't like that melodramatic imagery, but all of a sudden, 3 companies that control $4 trillion worth of money, that's what they're worth, they all decide to go after this one company because that's the refuge, That's the castle keep where people are fleeing to,
Right.
that be able to communicate, and they're trying to destroy it. And it's all premeditated. And it's got all these people, these civil libertarians in Congress applauding. So there we are.
Well, Victor, let's go back to last week. I'd like to just talk about this memo that our friend Heather Higgins, she's the chairman of the board of Independent Women's Forum. She's just great conservative. And she's written about how conservatives are losing the narrative of last week and how that is going to be very consequential to the things we believe in. If I just, I can't put this up on the show notes. I would if I could, but let me just read that. She wrote here that while the right have ambiguously condemned the small rioting group in Capitol, they have fallen into the trap of being embarrassed, as though these people are in any way us. They are not, all caps, and allowed it to sound as though the rioters were the Trump-supporting protesters. She also says, here are the couple of the lines being echoed. Trump should have known that the protests might get out of hand. Everyone should have known that this was the sort of thing which Trump was capable. Anyone who worked for Trump should be punished. Those who supported Trump incited the violence. How many millions of people does that apply to? Those who were silent and didn't oppose Trump are enablers of the events on January 6th. And she concludes with this. Again, this is her analysis of the bad narrative coming out of the right. Just as the left would do, everyone on the right must overtly refute the effort to spread the blame and tar anyone and everyone who has supported Trump as a party to the violence. Failure to do so is a sure way to make Trump supporters disengage from and reject big tent conservatism, and could encourage some to truly radicalize in a way that would be a threat to the foundations of our country. What I just read there, Victor, do you think she's correct on that as a possible outcome?
Yeah, I think she is. I won't mention any names. I'm trying not to mention names, but today and yesterday and the day before, there were 4 or 5 people that I know pretty well who have been pretty supportive of Trump, and they have published essays saying that they never liked Trump, and it was time for him to be punished and his supporters. And so it's sort of to take, not that Trump was Napoleon, but after the 100 days, you couldn't find anybody in France that wasn't a Bourbon supporter after Waterloo. And that's kind of where we are now. So everybody, and that's because of this splinter group that broke off. And as I said, Donald Trump didn't incite a riot. The problem that he did was that he kept objecting to, he had grounds to object to election, but he didn't, I guess, transparently tell his supporters that there was very little chance that election could be overturned. I don't think there was. I think he must have known that, but he was angry, and he thought maybe the more that he talked about the injustice, the more the chances were that it would be overturned, when in fact he misread that. The more he talked about it, and then the more there were not going to be overturned, the angrier some splinter groups got. So that was the problem. But the left, he gave the left a sword, and the sword, then they used it against him and his supporters. And that was getting back to our initial conversation when I thought, when I wrote that in November, that could have been avoided.
Right.
I was trying to find a way, just in my own mind, how you could sort of square the circle. You could say, there were irregularities by the violation of the voting laws going back to March and April, and B, we were all naive in letting that stand, and C, and expose them and file suits and ask for recounts, and then D, when that didn't work, save the Senate from these socialists, and then E, take that righteous grievance and use it to bring back sanity in the midterm elections. But that's just the way it is now. And now, but remember, we're kind of like in the first week of the Me Too movement, when everybody was a sexual predator, and then suddenly it started. We started to knock off Matt Lauer and Garrison Keillor, and then we got into some pretty important left-wing people. They lost a Senate seat with Al Franken, and then all of a sudden zero. And so much zero that when Tara Reade came forward with pretty explicit detail, far more than anything that was lodged against Brett Kavanaugh, it was like, well, you have no evidence. Well, this is a long time ago. How dare you suggest that Joe Biden ever did such a thing to you? And that was the end of Me Too. And so I think we're getting to peak ogre Trump, and now there's going to be the inevitable reaction. The reaction's already started, and the left is going to accelerate that. Mark my words, when we have this conversation in 6 months, it's not going to be about Donald Trump.
Right.
It's going to be about, there are leaks coming from the vice president's office that Joe Biden is non compos mentis. Did you hear what he said overseas? Did you see how he mangled that sentence? You hear what this, or did you see about all these crazy appointments he made? Or wow, are we ready for Puerto Rico given we're in a recession? Wow, who gets to be Do you really want these people appointed to the Supreme Court? Wow. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And then people are going to be very angry. And it's going to be sort of analogous to 2009 when Barack Obama was beloved and suddenly inaugurated. And then 18 months later, in November of 2010, he had the largest setback since the 1930s in the House.
Victor, we have about 2 minutes left. And this is a curveball. I read that there are 1 million signatures on a petition to recall the glorious governor of California. Is that meaningful in any way? Do you think there will? I should have read the article other than just the headline. But I mean, the anger is percolating in different ways. And what's likely out there for Gavin Newsom?
Well, I think he will be recalled. And the recall means that there's going to be an election to remove him. And then if he's removed, I think then the people who, I think it's either 2 elections or 1. I'll have to check that. I think the people, it's 1, and then the people with the highest votes win.
Right.
And the problem is that we're in such a blue state, it's hard to know how a Republican could A, get elected, and then B, if he could do anything, since there's super majorities in the state Senate and the state Assembly. But there's a deep hatred of unfortunate perhaps, of Gavin Newsom for a variety of reasons, mostly because he comes across as a left-wing opportunistic millionaire who was a creation of a lot of old family money and not his own entrepreneurial excellence. And by that, I mean he was very close with the Gettys. When he was mayor of San Francisco, that's really, you can mark the decline of San Francisco with the homelessness and the crime with him. He was hypocritical then with his mansion. And then when he became governor, he said a really stupid thing. He said there's going to be all these deaths. I think it was almost 1 million people. He bought into the Oxford immunology prognostications. And then he said, this is a time not to waste this crisis, that we can use this to have a different type of capitalism, a progressive capitalism. Well, that's the last thing he's ever lived by, progressive capitalism. His was crony capitalism. That's how he got his money. And then he shuts down all of these restaurants. So, all of these little canteen people that I see from Mexico that are trying to make a living, and they've got little canteens that they planted down. They're kind of illegal, quasi-legal. They have a porta potty. They're on trucks, but they're kind of jacked up on the side of the road. They're not really mobile. They're shut down, but not the French Laundry. And that's famous in California as the most expensive, hard to get reservation there is. And he's not just there in violation of his own quarantine. He's there with a bunch of lobbyists, healthcare lobbyists who are trying to make money during a panic. And then he shuts down wine tasting rooms, but not the one that he has an interest in. And then he tells all of these schools, you can't open. And even though the data and the science show you that children are more or less immune from it, and they're suffering far more damage psychologically, physically at home than they would be at risk to COVID in the schools, he shut them down on the orders of the teachers union, and then he put his kids in prep school. And he's been late on his property taxes. It's got kind of a fishy deal how he paid for his second big mansion. So he owes it's kind of a ritual. He owes his taxes. They always have a late due come that somebody finds out, puts it on the internet. And so it's just kind of the Bay Area attitude, the Nancy Pelosi, Mark Zuckerberg attitude, that Nancy Pelosi will talk about the poor and show us, $15 a pint ice cream and $25,000 refrigerator, or sneak into a hairdresser hoping nobody spots her as she lectures us on follow the quarantine. Or Mark Zuckerberg deplores walls at the border, but he's got 2 or 3 walled estates. It's the same old thing.
If I start making Hanson for governor bumper stickers, will you be upset by that?
Yes, I will.
Well,
I admire anybody who we have not had a successful governor in this state since Pete Wilson.
Pete Wilson. But we did have a great academic, Hayakawa, who
he was a senator.
Up. Right.
He was a good senator, but boy, Newsom was a failure. The second Brown term was even more of a failure than his first.
Right.
Arnold Schwarzenegger was a complete failure. Gray Davis was a complete failure.
Yeah. Pete Wilson left you with like $8 billion
he did. And all the freeways that we see and the dams, all those were the last vestigial work of Pete Wilson, and to a lesser extent, Governor Dick Mason and maybe even Governor Reagan. But we haven't had that. I think it's because the state's ungovernable. Absolutely ungovernable. It's had about 10 million people come here illegally the last 30 years. It's had about another 10 million leave. And then it's got about $5 or $6 trillion in aggregate market capitalization in Silicon Valley. And you put enormous wealth, enormous poverty, and the middle class flee, and you have the ingredients of a medieval society. And that's what it is.
Well, that's why we need a historian to manage it. So, well, anyway, that's all the time we have. Thanks, Victor, very much as usual. We thank those of you who are listening to the Victor Davis Hanson podcast on the National Review website. Do consider subscribing to it through one of the platforms that you prefer. I'm not going to name any of them because they're engaged in squelching Parler and other conservative entities. But yeah, listen to it on National Review. So thanks very much. And we hope to be back next week, unless we're shut down by the big tech gods, on the Victor Davis Hanson podcast. Thank you very much.